안녕하세요, 여러분. Hello, everyone. 환영합니다. Welcome. Welcome to the Climate Reality Project Bay Area Chapter Climate Justice Team. This is the fifth year of our Indigenous Voices Speaker Series, and today is our first program of 2024. We are pleased and excited to welcome Charlie Toledo, Director of the Suscol Intertribal Council based in Napa, California, who will be talking with us about cultural burning and climate resilience in Napa and beyond. Before I introduce our esteemed speaker further, I wish to acknowledge our co-sponsors, Climate Reality Project San Diego Chapter. Stephanie Weiner, if you're here, give us a wave. And also climatehope.us, and the creative director should be joining us soon, Pia Cortez. And now, as host of the program, I offer a land and people acknowledgement. As I've mentioned before, in Indigenous Voices programs, Indigenous people consist of less than 5% of the world's population, and yet protect 80% of global biodiversity, according to National Geographic. In 2021, a pamphlet called Indigenous Resistance Against Carbon discussed how efforts to protect Indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights have kept billions of tons of carbon in the ground, equivalent to 1/4 of the annual emissions of the US and Canada combined. Clearly, the climate crisis would be much more severe were it not for the efforts of Indigenous peoples here and everywhere. So the question for us today as climate activists and also as settlers, occupiers, and guests on the lands of the Native peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area and around the world, what is our role, our place, and our connection to the land that we are on and to the original peoples of these lands? What protocols should we be observing from our own cultures and in respect and recognition of the cultures of the Native peoples of the Bay Area? What do we need to notice, learn, and support about local Indigenous peoples and efforts to protect Indigenous ways, sovereignty, and culture? Where do we need to build relationships and uplift the efforts to protect Indigenous self-governance and treaty rights, and to move forward efforts to give back and rematriate land to the original Native peoples of the Bay Area? From this perspective and with these questions in mind, I offer this acknowledgement of the land and the original peoples of these lands, the Ohlone bands of Ramaytush, Karkin, Chochenyo, the Tamian Nation, the Coast Miwok, Bay Miwok, and Sierra Miwok, the Pomo, Patkin, Yokuts, and Wapo. We are lucky in our chapter to have a robust Indigenous Voices program and climate justice team. Please reach out to us if you're interested in getting involved and being part of and learning and growing our climate justice team. Thank you and kamsahamnida. And now we're going to introduce more our speaker. Charlie Toledo has been executive director of the Suscol Intertribal Council based in Napa, California since 1992. And since becoming director, Charlie has restructured the Suscol Intertribal Council to become one of the local, regional, statewide, and international leaders around issues of human rights for Indigenous peoples. She continues to inspire, consult, and mediate on various boards, committees, commissions, projects, and programs for the benefit of human rights issues globally and locally through the organization. And to further introduce our speaker, we have our co-chair of our climate justice team, Siri.
Thank you, Alma. I met Charlie because I attended one of the classes that Suscol Intertribal Council, her organization, has for educating people about Indigenous people in Napa and California and the United States. And the classes have been, for my understanding of myself and my country, and for the future that we can co-create. And I will drop a link in the chat for anybody who's interested in signing up for those classes. I've learned about hard stuff and I've learned about Indigenous approaches to healing from that hard stuff. And I've been an environmentalist my entire life, but listening to Indigenous people, especially Charlie and our other Indigenous speakers, has meant realizing that my idea of protecting the environment had no Indigenous people in it. And I have come to realize that thousands and thousands of years of Indigenous people and their land care practices have co-created the lands that I love. And I'm very pleased that Charlie is here to talk to us about one of those land care practices. So I will turn it over to you, Charlie, now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Siri. I'm going to go ahead. So I'm Towa, descendant of a Towa nation, native to New Mexico, but I've been living in Napa since 1972. So we'll be talking, I'm glad this group is from the Bay Area because it's more Bay Area focused, but still a little bit of around the country in North America. So I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint, and here we are. So this is a brief overview of the history of Native Americans in Napa County. And this kind of imagery had not been shared with non-Native people. When we started doing this in 1992, it was still taboo and we had a little bit of kickback, but now it's been normalized and is common. But these are California Pomo people. A lot of the ceremonial regalia is very similar to the whole Bay Area. And then there's just a few questions. I know we're not in person, so just in your mind answer, what historically makes a group of people a tribe? And these are California Pomo people in regalia at one of our ceremonies up in the Napa Valley. So what makes a group of people a tribe? These are the most frequent responses: geography, culture, food, environment, or their clothing. And all those answers are correct. But the one defining factor is language. It's a common language defines a tribal group. So based on this, how many tribes were in the United States pre-colonization? Again, just answer that question in your mind, or if you're taking notes, just in your notebook, on your paper. How many languages were spoken? How many tribes? There were over 700 languages spoken in the United States before the European invasions. And some of the pictures, most of the pictures are mine. They're from my collection, just different events that we've done. These are Mixteca dancers out in a public arena in the southern part of Napa. And a mural. This is the only depiction in all of Napa County that suggests that there were Indigenous people living here before the Euro invasions. So how many languages would have been spoken pre-1840? 1840 is about the time the Euro invasion started in California, not very long ago. How many tribes or languages were spoken in California? There's 700 languages in the United States. There was 300 different tribes, 300 different languages before the European invasions. California has the largest and most diverse number of tribes and languages in North America. And that's again because of the diversity of the geography of California, and plus there's plenty of water and food. So if we kind of narrow down to Napa, where I'm speaking from and where we created a lot of these presentations from, how many languages would the average Native person been speaking in Napa to travel to the coast or to San Francisco? Again, there was 300 languages in the whole state. Just in Napa, the average person would have been speaking 5 different languages: the Onisati, or referred to as the Wapo, the Ohlone, the Pupwin, the Pomo, and the Coast Miwok. So just in this immediate area, the average person would be speaking 5 different languages. And that's just a picture to kind of show the diversity, that we were civilized people, diverse, living in permanent villages, highly sophisticated, sustainable communities all over North America. And I put these pictures, especially the teepee one, because that's the stereotype. People think that all Indians lived in teepees, and there was only 7 of the 700 tribes of people that lived in teepees. The picture to the far left, the woman in the white, is regalia. It's post-colonial, post-Euro invasion, because she's wearing cotton, but her feather headdress is traditional. The Nez Perce from Washington, his regalia is traditional. It's all traditionally made fur, bone, and leather. And then standing right next to him is Coast Miwok. dressed in contemporary, and that's a contemporary outfit, the t-shirt and jeans with some Nike shoes, but just to show the diversity. So this is something I'll kind of repeat in the next half hour or so. Indigenous peoples lived in permanent villages in managed agricultural preserves. The staple food for most of the San Francisco Bay Area was acorns. And I didn't mention that here, but a tribe is made up of clans, and clans are bands, and bands are made up of clans. So a band is a group of extended family. A clan is the immediate family. So the tree orchards or oak trees were managed by clans, clearly marked, delineated spaces or territories, and they would manage the main resource within the tribal area. Pretty much like Oakland is included in that. Oakland, San Francisco, Marin, Sonoma counties, they had very similar lifestyles up into Lake County and Solano County. The fish and berries, grass seeds, and small game was added to the daily diet. So there was plenty of food. One of my mentors that I had for over 15 years is the elder. He said Napa was so rich, you just had to reach out your hands to get food. And I love this little picture here, little white flower. That's a buckwheat grass. And talking about burns, buckwheat comes in because that would be part of what they'd be burning. The rivers and creeks were full of fish. And my friends in their early childhood, and I'm like I'm about to be 74, but a lot of my friends remember in their childhoods up in Lake County, they didn't fish, they didn't spear, use nets. They just got into the creeks with their bare hands, picked up fish. The food was so plentiful, they just gathered it with their hands and throw it up on the shore. They'd clean the fish and then barbecue them and just have lunch right there. Willow, tule, and oak trees were the core of this complex agriculture. Willow is the base, this basket here to the left, that's a willow, that's an acorn storage basket. It's made with the whole stem of the willow. And the reason I'm bringing this up, especially before I talk about burning, is as the indigenous people, the basketry and their housing, that's what helped to maintain the landscape and keep it from being so out of control like it is now. Tule houses, that was most of California. Tule are reeds. And then these intricate, beautiful baskets. These baskets are made of willow. The top basket, that's a rough, what would be called a man basket, very large, using the whole leaf, the whole stem, and then have a tight lid. And that's where the acorns would be stored. It'd be harvested in the fall and then stored through the year round. A staple crop means it was something that was eaten every day. It was a whole food, provided all the nutrients that anybody needed to be healthy. And tule was used for canoes, houses, clothes, shoes, and baskets. And then we'll be talking about the forest burning. Forest management was an important part of agriculture. That what we, now that cultural birds are finally being recovered, which took about 150 years to have happen, and all the disastrous fires we've had in the Bay Area the last 3 years. Up in Napa, we had 5 huge firestorms. So it brought everybody awareness to the fact that this was not a wilderness that they discovered, but it was a sustained agricultural preserve that was maintained. And fire was one of the tools of water and land management. Prescribed burns is the primary tool. So what we have here, we at Suscol in 1995, 98, we purchased land, 20-acre parcel up in the northeast part of Napa. And when we first purchased it, our elders said, oh, the first thing you have to do is burn. So we went to the fire chief and they said, no, you can't burn. Well, 20 years later, they came to us in tears begging us to teach them. And I said, oh gosh, we didn't get to learn that because you wouldn't let us burn. But we're burning now. And then this is some of the prescribed burns. Napa County is in the forefront of the state as far as recovering cultural burns, probably because of all of our disasters. Everybody's in this really rapid situation to kind of catch up and maintain the forests. And then we're one of the first groups in Napa that started burning. We started burning last winter, and then these are fires from this winter. We are 20 acres, 16 acres is forested hills. And I'll talk about that as we go along, how we've been maintaining that. So the tribes would work together. They would be trimming the trees, and then the brush grasses and understory, and burn about every 3 years. Because we haven't burned here in 20 years, we're doing a catch up. But generally it's all the limbs, the lower limbs from the trees are trimmed off and then put into brush piles and then just started to burn. So this is us burning this season, actually. And this man in the black, Sal Panola, he's a California Coastal Pomo, and he's our property manager. So he's the one managing and kind of teaching, sharing this information with different volunteers that we have coming out this season and last season. Harvesting, this is a thing of how the forests were maintained and why they only had to burn every 3 years, because they would be using the willow, would be the framework of the tule house. And the tule is grows in the marshes and along the lakes and rivers. And that was a really important element of the life. The house to the left is a brush house, but again, making houses like this house is made of willow and tule, and that's in the creation of their structures. They would be maintaining the land, hands-on maintenance, and baskets was a very important part of that land maintenance. Every square inch of California, think about that. Every square inch of California was touched by human hands. All the land was tended. The forests, the shores, the waterways were annually cleared and harvested. We cannot talk about water, fire, land management without referring to the trees. And that's something that here in Napa County, they just came and invited me to come to a meeting. We've been trying to get to those meetings for 30 years to talk about how important the trees are to growing grapes and wine. The trees are a really important part of air and water. The oak trees were the basis of the food source. But when you're burning, when you're using the burns, it clears the brush, the lower, the understory, and then the thatch from the grasses gets cleared out in the burns. And it also removes mice, ticks, and mosquitoes. What's not to love about that? And the fires would strengthen the hardwood trees. And oak, again, was the primary staple food. Some of our elders tell us that the trees that we have now in the valley and probably around most of the Bay Area, the branches are all twisted. And these were left behind because the Euro invaders were cutting the oak. They cut the oak to create grazeland for their cows and to build San Francisco, Oakland, where Oakland used to be oak meadows. But these really big curvy branches, that wasn't those weren't usable by the Euro invaders, so they left those behind. But when the tribes were managing the trees, they would be choosing the tall, straight trees for strength. And this is Ron Good, the guy in the green sweater. He's one of our elders from the Central Valley. He's a tribal chair down in the Mono tribe in Bass Lake. And he's working with UC Davis, with all of the tribal people, making sure that Native people and people who want to learn how to start doing this, he's teaching classes. First, he had classes, 3 or 4 students were coming, but now he has groups from UC Davis, 60 to 70 people in his classes. So every 3 years, the areas would be burned to reduce the brush and revitalize the trees and the soil. The ash or char is part of the soil management. And then also, like I said, cleaning out the pests. And this is what's called a line burn. This would be in an open meadow. This isn't what we're doing in our space because we don't have lines to burn. But this would be in the early fall after the rains start. The tribes he's going through with a drip burn, a diesel drip, and just getting a big line of fire going through the grasses. Traditionally, they would have had a large hardwood, oak branch, or manzanita covered with wax, and then just torching. A line of the men would just be going in a line, walking through the meadows, just burning the fields. And that would be like every 3 years. Behind here, the hills that you see behind this burn, those are untended. You can tell because they're too densely, they're growing too dense. This is an interesting picture. I'll kind of sit here. This is a managed forest. You can see there's understory, there's not debris. All the trees are limbed. The lower limbs, dead limbs are all cut off. And then after a fire moves through is right to the right of that picture. It looks the same. What's cleared out is the grasses. The soil is energized and fertilized, and the ticks and mosquitoes and mice are removed. This is an unmanaged forest, which is what most of California has right now. And after the fire, this is what that looks like. This is what lots of Napa Valley looks like now. Like I said, we've had 5 major firestorms. And up around Calistoga, Lake Berryessa, St. Helena, the hills look just like this. They looked like this, overgrown, unmanaged for about 150 years. And this is what they currently look like, just a really blighted area. So acorns, that was an important part of managing the forest. Acorn was a daily diet. It was supplemented with fish, small game, berries, seaweed, clams, abalone, and perennial grasses. And this kind of, I don't know if you can see that thatched lodge, that's willow. The willow repels moths and mice. And so the acorns would be stored up in that through the winter. Since this is a sepia photograph, this is post-colonial. This is after the Euro invasions. The woman's wearing a cotton dress, but she's still, demonstrating how the acorns were managed. You would use the basket, and you see this basket over here where my arrow is, put rocks in the fire. The rocks get glowing hot. You take a willow branch with a little circular loop on it, and then rinse that ash off in the water, and then put it with the acorn mush. And this acorn in the basket right here has been processed. It's leached for 3 days in water, then ground. And sometimes it's ground and stored, but generally it's ground just before they're going to eat it. So you would leach the acorn, peel them, harvest them in the fall, peel them, and then leach them for 3 days, usually in a basket with the water running through them in a creek, and then just store them whole and then grind them up before you cook it. So just like this basket has the ground acorn flour, an acorn is a nut. People always want to make bread from it. And it's like, well, if you were going to make walnut bread, you'd have to put a lot of flour. So it was used more like cream of wheat. It just mixed with water. And sometimes some people would add salt, but most of the elders that I know that eat it regular, they just cook it and just drink it or eat it like a small cereal every day. So these are the whole acorns harvested. They're unpeeled up at the top left side. And then here's a grinding bowl with a metate, showing how the shells would be broken off and peeled, and then the acorns would be ground in the rock just before cooking. Or else they'd be stored in an airtight, watertight basket, and then just used for cooking. Again, it was breakfast every day for more than 10,000 years for most of the people living in the Bay Area. The willow is an important part of the daily life of the Native people. Like I've said before, it was the base, the framework for the house, is the framework for the canoes. The willow is what the baskets were made of. And by harvesting the willow regularly 2 or 3 times a year, that kept the waterways clear. The waterways are all tangled and congested because the willow has just been allowed to overgrow and be wild. And that's kind of part of our water crisis in California. It's stuff that our council and Native people have been working on actively for about 40 years. It's taken us 40 years to get into those discussions. And this is a picture of the southern part of Napa showing the tule growing. Our organization was in the forefront of the water protection watershed development project for Napa, became a model for the whole state and then the whole country, bringing all the stakeholders to 3 years of meetings. And I was the only one at the table, about 300 people at those bi-monthly or every other month meetings, asking for the wetlands to be restored, asking, for the tule to be allowed to grow and the willow to be harvested, because that's an important part of the land maintenance. And because the tribes, the caretakers were removed, 92% of the Native Americans were killed with Euro contact. So you've got 8% of what was a fully occupied state, struggling to try to get maintenance again of the land. To the right is some of the grasses you see here. This is a creek, a watershed up in the hills of Napa. It'd be one of the feeder creeks to the Napa River. The picture to the left is the southern part of Napa River going towards American Canyon, Vallejo, and then feeding into the San Francisco Bay. Napa River used to be the largest polluter of the San Francisco Bay. After the watershed project got put in place and my insistence that the tule beds had to be restored at the southern part of the valley, it found out that, tule cleans out heavy metals and toxins from the water. So Napa River is a tidal flow, so the water would flow in and out 4 times a day. When the tule beds were restored, and then they stopped putting toxins and dumping, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and the early 80s. Europeans were thought of the river as kind of like a toilet. You just take it down to the riverbanks and flush it. And then when the winter rains came, it would just wash it away, polluting the river and the bay and the ocean. But now people have kind of figured that out, that that's not a good practice. And then the tule is a really integral part of keeping the waters clean. And so that's, and look how pretty it looks. I mean, the water's fresh and clean. This is tule. Again, this would be a little harvesting basket, that bundles of tule. That's how you take them. You harvest the tule. They grow about to be 9 feet tall. And they're bundled together, tight bundles. And then those tight bundles are woven together into a canoe or a basket. This is a harvesting basket, but a lot of times the canoe, this would be a one-person canoe, but it would be much longer than this. And again, underneath, you see the tule mats. Remember, the tule was for mats, baskets, hats, shoes, houses. It was really essential. And by harvesting the tule and burning through the tule in low tide, late summer, that cleans out and revitalizes the roof. It clears out the thatch. Again, I'm showing these pictures of a brush house with bags of acorns. This is post-colonial because it's a photograph. But by making a house of brush, this little house here is, again, looks like willow, but it's the whole willow branch. It's not the peeled willow. But by harvesting and using the willow and the tule, that was a form of maintaining all of those healthy plants along the waterways and creeks. Real essential for the lifestyle. I love this picture. It's just this is a Hupa medicine person. So from up in Humboldt County, where they didn't get as decimated as the tribes in the Bay Area. So their traditions were still in place. But this is a medicine woman. You can see the baskets were an essential part of the life. She's got a woven basket hat that establishes her status. Also the necklaces, the dentilia tells us what tribe she's from. The fact that she's wearing clothing, and it's a photograph, we know it's post-Euro invasion. And the picture to the left is one of the last full-blood, Wapo people from the Napa area, Laura Summersall. And she realized at one point in the 1930s, that the way of life was being wiped out. So her with 4 other women started working with the Smithsonian Institute. They documented their language, their traditions, their songs. And so there's a lot of photographs and information about her. But Native people did not have access to that information until just the last few years. It was kind of locked away for academicians in Washington, Smithsonian. And I just like to show these. This is, again, from the 1930s, when the woman was asked why she wove such a big basket. Again, by the regalia, you see the genitalia, the basket hats, the shell dress. They're Hupa. They're far north Humboldt County tribes, but she wove the basket just to prove that she could. But it took 4 or 5 people. I spent 2 years, and she entered this basket in a World's Fair competition. But the patterns of the basket all depict, they tell stories. And the average basket would take about 2 years. This woman to the left is wearing leather regalia, which the tribes in California didn't wear leather. They wore tule clothing. So the leather was more of an adaptation. People would dress Indians up for fairs or shows to how they thought they should look, but not necessarily how they traditionally looked. The woman to the far left with the dentity, she's dressed traditionally. Seashells, genitalia, that's a shell that's from the north coast of California. Again, the baby baskets were an integral part. Usually the grandmother would make the basket for the baby, and the design of the basket, this is made of willow, and this red bud is a harder wood that makes the handle. It's the first baby carriers. The baby could be carried, hung from the tree. You see the little toy basket, that the little children that were mimicking their aunties and mothers and grandmothers, they would be making little baskets or have little baskets to play with so that they got familiar. But the stitching and the shaping tells what tribe the basket comes from. This basket to the left, this is post-colonial, and you hardly see the willow. They've tried sort of put together, this is a pomo baby, a pomo picture from up in Ukiah, but the baby's wrapped kind of swaddled in blankets, and the basket looks like a piece of wood with maybe a strap of leather or something. So it was sort of cobbled together, but still set up so the baby could be carried and kept close to the mother, the grandmother. the primary caretakeress. Basket weaving was a really important part. Again, these baskets, these are willow baskets with the hoop. Again, that hoop is a little strong. So these baskets are a little bit rougher. And the fact that the babies are wrapped up like that in blankets was also another indication post-colonial. And the babies are real dirty, which is not how they would have looked. The picture to the left is, again, it's staged, but it's authentic in the Thule house behind the women. She's weaving the basket. She's sitting on the ground, but she's wearing clothing. And then the fact that there's a picture, but the village is right near the water back here. And that's where most of the villages, all the villages in the Bay Area were close to creeks, not necessarily the rivers, because the rivers would flood. They would be close to creeks, springs, or the seashore. And the houses were made, like I said, from Thule. This is a picture from our land. This is after the cultural burns, and I picked these pictures because these areas were all overgrown. We've been maintaining the street side 2 acres, but we reinforced the wall with stone. And then now that the brush is cleared, we're seeing a lot more deer. We see the wildlife. It's easier for wildlife to move around. It's easier for the trees that we want to move. We've created a huge berm here that overflowed last winter, so we reinforced that with straw bales to keep it from overflowing. But these steep hills that are here, you can't quite see in this picture, we created a berm to hold the water, and that keeps it from flooding and eroding at the roadside, but it also helps to you keep the water, replenishes the aquifers, the underground aquifers. So we're using, on our 20 acres, we've been using all the indigenous land practices. Again, I'm sharing the baskets, just that baskets were an integral part of the culture, the native cultures. And a basket like this big basket, this little quail top knot feather, a basket like this would make 4 to 5 years, take 4 to 5 years to make. And the little white beads, that's the clamshell beads. And the smaller and tinier the beads are, the more valuable they are. So this is a wedding basket. This would be a basket that somebody would prepare, maybe taking 3 to 5 years to harvest and create, and then given to the couple. The basket is very precious, an indicator that the family is very important, and the children are held secure in the basket. The parents are the framework of the basket, and then contained in the basket is the future generations. This little basket, a feather basket, these are really, again, showing pomo baskets, California baskets, were some of the most well-made baskets in the world. These are feathers from a woodpecker, little tiny feathers. In the old baskets, the feathers were actually woven into the willow. And very few people have that skill now. What the people that do feather baskets now, the pomos that I know, they skin the bird and then just wrap the feathers onto the willow. But the top knot around, that's the clamshell bead. That was the money. It shows the wealth, and then again, these little black feathers at the top, it's the top knot of the quail. And the black and red feathers, those are the feathers from the woodpecker. And usually all those feathers would take a while to gather, you'd be gathering that. And again, the baskets were part of the land stewardship, besides being incredibly beautiful art forms. So these are the suggestions that we made to Monterey County. Monterey County implemented this 15 years ago, and Australia also has successfully adapted this. Public education about the severity of statewide water crisis. We're talking about California. I've been lobbying for the state of California 20 years. My God, I can't tell you how badly I was treated for quite a few years. But Monterey County is a model for the rest of the state to follow. And this is what they did. These are the steps they took. Public education. Then they began massive water conservation, a reduction 60% of their water, which I've been lobbying at the state level for 15 years. And Governor Brown was going to do it, but he got scared and stopped. They're afraid of a mass exodus. If the public realizes how severe the water crisis is in the state of California, they're afraid of a mass exodus. So the third step would be to create a statewide moratorium on deforestation. People look at the Napa Valley and talk about how beautiful it is. What I see is a clear-cut forest. It's a ruined, devastated area. To create regional moratoriums on hotels, to create regional moratoriums on vineyards and wineries, to end outdoor water use, allow only gray recycled water for landscaping and agricultural, to reintroduce indigenous forest, land, waterway, and caretaking practices, and the use of fire for forest and riparian corridor restoration. So these are the suggestions they've made to the state. And like I said, they were going to endorse these, but they got scared. I thought Governor, when he got elected, was going to do it, but he didn't. He's scared too. Anyway, so dancing and singing is an important part of everyday life. The first people spent 2 hours a day in their gathering the food and housing. The rest of the time was spent in dancing, singing, regalia making, basket making, and storytelling. Wealthy people. Descartes was a French philosopher who said you can measure the wealth of a people by how much free time they have. Based on that definition, the people in the United States are some of the poorest people in the world. But this is Mount Canocti. It's the headwater of the Napa River. Clear Lake, it's a volcanic area. And Clear Lake is the longest, oldest freshwater lake in North America, which backs up my theory. It's not my theory, the elders have told us that Napa is the oldest continuously inhabited place in North America, continuously inhabited. There's other areas that have been in New Mexico where I'm native to, they were inhabited longer, but not continuously. And this is a roundhouse. And again, you see the Thule houses around Clear Lake. And this was the early, probably 1930s. It's a photograph, but it's a sepia photograph. That's up in Lake County. The tribes weren't as devastated in Lake County as they were in the San Francisco Bay Area. So North America was not a discovered wilderness. It was tens of thousands of years of a rich, sustainable agriculture with diverse, civilized people living together in harmony and balance with each other and the natural world. And this is our property when we first purchased it in 1998. It looks different than that now. And here's our contact information. We have a website and a YouTube channel, what I didn't put here.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Would this be a good time for questions and answers? Okay, so we had one that came in the chat from Dahlia. Is there concern about greenhouse gases released during the burns?
No, because you burn during the rainy season. Like we're burning now, and so it's moisture, the ground's really wet, the smoke gets put down or subdued. And when you're burning trees, like clean wood, the carbon emissions that we have to worry about are the stuff from oil. And the fires, the big giant firestorms that we had here in Napa and Sonoma County, the last 5 years or 4 years, we had 5 major firestorms. The toxins were from like all the poisons we build our houses with, the installation, the wiring, the aluminum. One of my friends showed a picture from 2 years ago, the last fire we had, and there was this little silver puddle. And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Oh, that was my car." The fires were so intense that everything, and those fires are very toxic. But the carbon comes from burning oil in our cars and stuff. But burning wood, it does create a carbon, but it's not a toxic smoke. And then it's during the rainy time, so the rain suppresses the smoke.
Okay, thank you. There was a point you were talking about, you had some photos of our land. You mentioned our land and some of the indigenous land practices. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what was that land, and is it managed by the Suscol Intertribal Council? Or I was just curious to hear more about that.
Oh, sorry, we actually own it. The behind me in this picture is we purchased it in 1998. We're in the forefront of the land back movement because I work on human rights issues and have been since 1986 internationally with the UN and other places like that. We've been advocating, and we thought we would get access to unrestricted access to land, but then that wasn't happening. And the chairperson at the time in 1992 said, "Charlie, we're just going to have to buy it back." And I didn't have the idea. People think it was my idea, but it wasn't. But he then took off to Washington, and so we stayed. But we were able to purchase the land, but our mentors had said, and this was 1998 in Napa, County, don't tell the realtors that it's Indian people. So I told our realtor, who knew we were an organization, a Native American organization, I said, don't tell the realtors that we are going to. And she said, oh, no, they'd really be happy to help the Indian. I said, I don't think so. And then she did tell one realtor, and that's a long story, but it did not go well. And then she apologized to me profusely, and we just proceeded and didn't tell people. So some of my friends now, the Coast Miwok, just they're saying the land back. But what's happening is organizations are giving them the money to purchase their land. And if they don't have a 501c3, if they don't have a nonprofit or a community-based organizations, what they're called now, they'll have to pay taxes. Because in the Winnemem Mintoon up in Mount Shasta, I just talked to them and I was congratulating my friend. She said, what? I said, I'm getting your land back. And she goes, oh yeah, that. So they being the land trust or somebody, I forgot the organization that donated. So it was a tax-free for the people that donated it to the Winnemem Mintoon, but they have to pay tax on it, and they have to pay tax on their land. My friend, the Coast Miwok, they just got 26 acres in Marin County. And he said to me, everybody's saying they gave us the land back, but they didn't give us the land back. They gave us the money to buy the land. And they got, I forgot how much money they got. I think it was in Oakland, the Ohlone, they got $26 million and they bought 2.5 acres in downtown Oakland. And in the Miwok and the Shasta, I think it was 20,000 acres for 1.2 million. The Coast Miwok and Marin County, 1.2 million, they got 26 acres. And both the Shasta and the Miwok territories are wilderness areas. So they would still have to get permits and stuff. What we did, because we were a 501c3, and we had people donate money to us, then we purchased the land, and after it was fully paid for in 3 years, we applied to the state of California to create a public benefit, which means we don't pay taxes on the land. But that was a lengthy process, a little tricky to do. The thing we could have been, instead of a 501c3, we could be a 501c4, and then we would be like a religion. And we thought about that for a minute, but not. We myself personally, and most everybody in our organization has a knee-jerk reaction to the word religion, because it was the religions that killed us and wiped us out and all that. So we just stayed with the 501c3, but we are tax-free, but I do have to apply for that. We have to apply for that every year. But the land's purchased, and so there's no debt. Everything that we've done has been without debt. And so it belongs to the organization. There's two land bases in the Bay Area, Yaqueyama, north of Santa Rosa. They did a similar thing like what happened at Alcatraz, where there's federal law that says any landless tribe can reclaim unused federal land. So the island of Alcatraz in the early 70s is federal land. And so the California tribes, they took the land back and were able to occupy it for 22 months. But that's a long story about how that went. But I think right now, what it's looking like is the plans that they made back in 1969, 1970, 71, that those are actually going to get implemented. I think that the island of Alcatraz is going to be deeded back to the tribes, and the design that they made to have a Native American cultural center on the island is going to happen. It's moving forward. We wouldn't have imagined that even 10 years ago. But when the tribes left Alcatraz, because it's a long story, I won't get into it, but they broke into two groups. So they went to some unused federal land west of Davis, where DQU took over 600 acres, and that belongs to the Board of Trustees. I was on that board for 10 years and helped them meet all the requirements they needed to meet, which were pretty lengthy, in order for the land to be deeded to the Board of Trustees. At Yaqueyama on the west side, north of Santa Rosa, they had 60 acres that was reduced to 30 acres because their board started selling off some of the land. But they still kept it, and they were able to meet the requirements, the 21-year requirements of their deed, because they took over unused federal land. They reclaimed it under Indian law, both those land bases. But then they had to come up with a plan, a design that the government approved. So they had 21 years to meet all those requirements. When I went to DQ, that's a really long story. All these stories are long stories. But we were able to, but it was very, very difficult. And so when we're just saying difficult, it means that people were chasing us. We were being threatened. Our phones were tapped. I used to be followed around by little white helicopters working in Napa, with the police going after my children. It is not a easy process. And now things have changed. It's 30 years later, 40 years later. But there still is the lateral violence because you oppress a people so intensely, as Native Americans have been oppressed, especially here in California, that it takes a while to recover from that kind of trauma. So we're still in the very early stages of that recovery. Is what we refer to as lateral violence. And that's what I'm trying to get the community, the elders in the communities to start addressing, is how are we going to address that? Because that's our biggest threat right now, is that. Any
Thank you, Charlie.
I can always make a long answer to any question.
Oh, we got a few more questions. Okay. Is there an aggregate tracking of how much of existing land back efforts are successful, in progress, or proposed, and how can we support land back efforts? That's from Mira Misink.
Okay. You kind of have to look to the area, and it's really sensitive. Everything right now is hypersensitive, because like if you chain a dog to a fence and just beat it every minute, and then you go to unchain it, the dog is going to be very aggressive. You have to, and so Native people have been oppressed for a very long time. That was the assimilation, the forced assimilation occurred in my family line, because my grandfather was taken as a 7-year-old child and given as a servant into a Spanish family in New Mexico. Two of my grandmothers were taken as babies. In California, the United States, when they invaded places, and the Catholic Church was the missions that came into California, the first thing they do, and they did this in Western Europe too before they came here, is they take people's children. And then if you take somebody's children, or what was happening up in Round Valley, it's some of the disturbances that occurred there that we were trying to address when they were happening in 1986. The FBI would come into a house and grab a baby and put a gun to its head. That was still being done by the U.S. government in the Indian tribes as late as 1995. Or just taking the children. They came in and they took all the young men. They arrested them all and took them. And that's a long story about what was happening there. We were trying to get attention. We're trying to get San Francisco Chronicle to go up and report what was happening up there. And the editor of the paper told me that he thought it sounded too dangerous. And I said, gosh, I thought reporters went into war zones. He said, well, we don't have permission to go in there. They did not have permission from the United States government to report on what was happening in California at the tribes just north of San Francisco. Round Valley is where all the tribes, all the Indians, the survivors of all the bloody runs from San Francisco, Napa, Sonoma, Marin, Solano County, Sacramento, they were all run and pushed up into Round Valley. And that's where all these things were happening, where they were putting guns to babies' heads. They rounded up all the guys and questioned them. That was really tough. So there's still a lot of things to deal with. A lot of trauma. There's a lot of people that we work with. Siri was talking about a cohorts we're teaching when we first developed the cohorts that we're teaching as a pilot project for the state that is being replicated at the state level to develop curriculum about the genocides of California. So when you hear the words genocides of California, the European invasions, those are words that we coined. I started using those words. I was ridiculed in public, on radio shows, wherever else, about using the word genocide as being too harsh. We were also told in a lot of our cohorts, teaching teachers and therapists, we were told, well, the Indians just have to get over it. And one thing my co-person said, that nobody tells the Jewish people to get over it. That Holocaust was in World War II in Western Europe, every kid in the United States learns about the Holocaust in World War II. But they're not learning about the genocides that occurred here. 92% of the population was wiped out in 25 years of contact. And that still is not in curriculum. When I was using the word genocides, even tribal people would say genocide, that's a little harsh. But now the Governor Newsom, because we worked with him on a lot of human rights issues, that he was in the forefront creating an international model for human rights at the city level. And Governor Newsom did that as a superintendent of San Francisco. And San Francisco then became the international model of how a city can take these international treaties and put them in the ground at the city level, where they make a difference. And that's what I've been saying. I don't know, since I was about 17, 1966, I started saying, the thing of think global, work local, think global, work global, think local. And then I was at a point in my life where I had been traveling around the world, doing a lot of work, and then just decided I was going to focus back here. But then I remembered why I stopped, because it's really dangerous. The most dangerous place to do human rights work is in the town or the city that you live in. And when you're an oppressed group of people, it's very dangerous. And you can go to our YouTube channel and look at our mascot videos, not your mascot, and you can see how dangerous it is. Those are videos that were made 3 years ago. I was asked to do a presentation to the 4 county regions of mental health and human services, talk about the systemic racism in Napa, and you could replace that with Marin, San Francisco, Oakland, Solano County. You could replace that with Santa Cruz, but I'm working in Napa. And so I wanted to show the video, and my friend said, well, we just want to have a talk, a discussion. It was all the directors of HHS from, I think it was Napa, Sonoma, Marin, Solano. It was 5 counties, so maybe it was San Francisco. But I said, we have this 12-minute video. I just want to show the video, and then I'll talk for 40 minutes or answer questions. But we showed the video in the room. After the 12-minute video was very silent. Thank you, Siri, for putting that link in there. Because on YouTube you have access to, and it's free. They were just very silent, because the directors of these programs, they were all people of color. There was women, there was people of color, there was Black people, Asian people. Wow, I was in a mixed, I thought, wow, here we are in Napa and with a mixed audience. But the room was very, very quiet. And they said, oh my goodness. And I said, well, that's why I want to show the video, because it was the public board hearings at the school board to discuss the issue. And there's nothing to say. I mean, I told my friend Heidi, who was the one who invited me to speak, I said, God, gosh, I hadn't seen that video in 2 years, and I did create a post-trauma reaction. It was pretty scary for me. Because all those people live here in this town still, and we're all still trying to get along. And I think that's all we can do, is the best we can. We all have to get along. So to say how you can help people that are trying to repatriate, you have to be very respectful. And the first thing is you have to have permission from them to help them. And that's the truth and listening sessions that Governor Newsom started. And then they're using the cohort model. This PowerPoint I showed you is a little kind of sampling of how we did that. We would take a topic and then just develop it with slides and discussion afterwards. And we presented it like a crime scene. We had who, what, where, when, and how. And when I presented it to Truth and Listening, there's 2 women lawyers. They're supposed to do the whole state of California, help develop curriculum, and they're going to all the different tribal areas. And when I first told her, we're just finishing up this pilot project, that it was a successful endeavor. And I told her that, and she goes, oh my God. She goes, that's going to save us so much time, because they were just starting to collect all these stories, and she had no idea how they would organize it. And then later I Googled her, which I should have done before I talked to her, Christina Snyder. She's the tribal liaison from the governor's office to the tribes of California, and she's the one in charge of the truth and listening sessions. And when I Googled her, she's a criminal lawyer. So when I said we presented the information like the crime scene that it was, she was just like, oh my God, that's going to save us so much time. So we've done that. We've created several pilot projects. Well, like I said, we're in the front of the state as far as prescribed burns, using gabions. I was going to put all that stuff in here, but you wanted a shorter presentation, because we put in the waterways, we put rock carriers, and that stops erosion, but it holds the water and replenishes the aquifers. We put huge berms that we planted with indigenous plants, pollinators, and that stops the erosion, replenishes the aquifers. And that's what's being done in the deserts in Arizona and New Mexico, and also down in Mexico, that you can actually bring water back to the deserts. And that essential part is the trees, because the aquifers, even if you're not pumping water from a well, the trees need that underground water to grow and to be strong. And like I said in this slideshow, you can't talk about water and land without talking about trees. And that's why the elder Ron Good, when we were one of the first burn projects being funded by the state here in Napa, here in this land that's behind me. And I said, I told him, and he said, don't call it fire management, say forest management. So Lucas Pasek is the Resource Conservation District. He was the chair who sort of said, hey, come and be part of this coalition. I'm like, okay. And I said, our elder's saying forest management, and he changed it. And so Napa changed it, but then the whole state of California changed it. So they're not calling it prescribed burns, they're calling it forest management. And the prescribed burns are a tool of managing the forest. And to have that quick of a response, considering how long it took us to get anything, because of all the disasters and the severe water crises. Governor Brown.
Charlie, we're at about 1 minute to that top of the hour. We have more questions than we have time for in this minute. I want to give you a chance to do like a 1 minute closing, and I'm just going to sneak in Siri's question, which was any kind of reactions you're getting to the prescribed burn work that you're doing. But also the thing I would add, which is any last words for us as climate activists who are concerned about climate justice, who are want to figure out how to continue backing the work of Indigenous leadership. So there you go, this impossible task in 1 minute.
I can do that. I think the most important thing is to lobby. We're lobbying, but we're 0.01% of the population. So everybody lobbying to the governor, to your county supervisors, that list that I gave you guys, that was pretty much what I would recommend. And then you recorded that, right? But to put a moratorium on hotels, put a moratorium on deforestation, put a moratorium on vineyards and wineries, and outside water use. Stop it.
Is that list on your website somewhere, or is it something you can provide to us and we can provide it to people?
I'll make a copy and send it to you.
Okay, that sounds good.
But I guess we could put it on the website. Monterey County has done that, and Australia did that. They were going into what ended up being a 10-year drought, which we were in a 9-year drought. We just are coming out of it with this rain. And then when the drought ended in Australia, they kept doing that. But Monterey isn't part of the Delta Bay water, so they developed their own, and that's what they did. The one flaw they had, but when we went there, I was part of a board that we were going around the state, and I was an advisory board, so people used to listen to me. And then they were not cutting the willow. They were just not, you couldn't cut anything in the riparian corridor. So it was all tangled up. And I said, no, you're killing the water. You have to clear, just like I showed you in this video.
Right. Charlie, thank you. Before we close, I want to let everyone know, Syria and I are going to stay for another 15 minutes or so. We're trying to mimic what happens in live presentations, which people hang out, chat with each other. So we're going to hang out with each other for those who want to stay. Charlie, I don't know if you're going to stay or not. And then if there's a number of people, we'll do some breakout groups. Just for people to reflect on what they learned and what they're thinking and what their next steps might be. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Charlie, for your time and all the work you've done over the last 30 plus years. Thank you everyone for your interest in the Indigenous Voices Project. Please come again. Please join our climate justice team or our chapter if you aren't already a member. And thank you again.